I just wanted to kick off by saying welcome to everyone, the current 114 who have joined us. I'm really happy that there's this many people have been able to join us. Normally on these things you do housekeeping stuff, but I presume everyone knows where their own toilets are, etc. So we don't need to do too much of that. So just wanted to quickly explain the format and how we're going to run through this. So what we've got is the 3 presentations that you should be aware of the bulk analysis, 4-stage clearance and the CDM thing. So we're going to run through the 3 presentations, and I'll just briefly introduce the presenters beforehand and say sort of thank you at the end. But we'll do the forum for questions after all of the presentations rather than after each one. Otherwise, I feel like everything will get broken up and we won't know where we are. The other thing is we're sort of aware that the questions are kind of probably one of the really important parts of this, and there may well be more questions than answers from this. And we may, at the end of this, decide that what we need to do is have like little further workshops or seminars on specific areas that are raised. And the other thing is, with so many people on a call like this, what I don't want to do is try and get, although we do need detailed questions answered, is to not get too bogged down in detail and have like a 10-hour conversation about something very specific that takes us through till midnight. What we want to try and do is identify broader areas where there is a consensus that we need some more information on, rather than on too much really fine detail. We've already had some brilliant questions, so we're probably going to run through those at a starting point and see how it goes. But on those questions, what we're going to try and do is pick up the broad themes and answer questions as we go through. But some of them that might need detailed answers, we might not have the answers for that today, and something we need to discuss further. And just we're having a chat with Sam Law just a little bit earlier and saying, what we're trying to do, identify, are there areas where everyone sees this as being something we need a bit more information on rather than just one, and those are the bits that we can sort of take forward. And I suspect bulks and the auditing are the bits that people seem to have this consensus on, because I think what we quite often do is we get a new bit of guidance or documentation like this, we all go and look at it ourselves, do our gap analysis, decide what we're going to do on our own, and then later on have a argument with UCAS about it. And I'm really hoping what we can do is get some consensus over the areas where we think there is a little bit interpretation. So anyway, I will stop waffling on now and say thank you to Sarah Mason, who's going to, and I think I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say, Sarah, because I know there's people who are panicking about, do I need to buy gallons of solvent and do I need a new fume cabinet? And I think the answer is no, we don't. But I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say. But remember, we'll be right at the end where we'll ask questions. So if people want to type things down or just make some notes, but also we've already got some questions relating to that. So looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Sarah's the quality manager of APP and has worked with asbestos, well, say in the asbestos profession since the mid-80s. Sarah, you don't look old enough to have started doing it then, so I'll get the compliments in early. But thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Jonathan. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So welcome to this first part of the webinar. As you know, 248 came, well, long-awaited 248 edition 2 came out first in May and then second part in July. So we're going to be talking about the July version and looking at some of the issues or the potential issues there could be in trying to interpret some of the requirements. So what's new? Well, I've interpreted, I mean, some will have different emphasis on interpretation, but from my point of view, there certainly seems to be a lot more emphasis on quality control checks. So we already know about the 20% reanalysis rate for 40 points and above. That's over a 24-hour period. Now we're going to have a minimum of 5% QC checks as well on top of that. So labs will now have to look at developing their reanalysis rate. You may already have a well-established rate that is beyond the 5%. But labs need to look in more detail, whether that's going to be daily reanalysis, weekly, monthly, depending on volume, and obviously covering all your analysts. The other part that I picked up on was two issues to do with NAD, no asbestos detected in samples. There's more emphasis on confirmatory analysis. So that means that when we have NAD, as we all know, they're the more difficult samples to analyse in some cases because we've got to go that little bit further. And the guidance is asking us to go that little bit further so that we're very comfortable with the result that we're actually putting our names to as accredited laboratories. And don't forget and note that, of course, the point system is slightly changed because if you have NAD samples, you're going to have to allocate 2 points to them, regardless of sample type. Now, in my opinion, as a lab manager as well as quality manager, that presents commercially some tough decisions because, if you're doing a lot of negative sampling, which clients do require, you might, have quite a lot of samples of maybe plasterboard or other materials that could actually mount your points up very quickly. So it's something that labs are going to have to look at more carefully, but they're 2 points regardless of sample type. The one that I'm getting a lot of feedback on at the moment is the increased emphasis on bulk sample treatment. Now, notice there's an asterisk there. It says if necessary. So it's not always something we have to do, but it's something that we should have as a method within our laboratories, a documented method that will help us look at those samples and confirm NAD or confirm that we've not missed any very small amounts of asbestos. We all know some of the tricky samples we get in our labs, whether it's the daily texture coating, which is a difficult sample, vinyl floor tiles, thermoplastic floor tiles, but also debris samples or that awful term snots on walls. Those tiny samples that we've got to look for, potentially look for one of the 6 regulated fibers. So we're looking at removing interfering matrix that might hamper ID. And I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about that. We also have to look at further treatment if fibers are embedded or encapsulated in matrix. And that's where our detailed recording of observations, which we've always done, but we may well have lost a little bit of that when we're using electronic or digital versions like Alpha Tracker or Teams, where we may have lost a little bit of that recording of observations. So 248 is now quite clearly asking us to document what layers you have in your material. Is it homogeneous, inhomogeneous, which we've already done and always done, but looking at those observations in more detail and recording that. And of course, UCAS will be looking for that detail. And we should, as professional analysts, we should be making those observations. The last point I've got here is we've had this maximum of 60 points, 60 samples or 70 points in 24 hours. That's come through in lab 30, but now it's an absolute maximum. So not just a maximum, absolute. So that's something that labs have to consider as well. So looking at a little bit more detail, because my webinar is more about the treatment side of things because of some of the issues that I've talked to other labs about, and including my own lab, is what does that actually mean? So we've got a new table now, table A2.2, looking at sample preparation. None of it is difficult. None of it is unfamiliar to most labs. And of the 157 labs that we have in the UK, most of you will already be tackling some of these, sort of treatment of samples in your own labs. So when we look at loose fibre, as we know, and lagging and AIB, they're not difficult samples to open up. But you might want to consider using dilute hydrochloric acid, 10% hydrochloric acid, for breaking down substrate that might be surrounding lagging so that you can, have that good contrast so that you can visibly identify lagging when sometimes you're looking for a needle in a haystack. When it comes down to the more day-to-day samples like decorative plaster or decorative textured coating or Artex, This is where it starts to get tricky. They're the majority of the samples from housing that we get through a laboratory, certainly in my laboratory, and they do become difficult samples. Sometimes you might have a house which has got sort of several samples, and you might find half of them have got asbestos in and half haven't. So do we go back and blame the surveyor? Obviously, if you're a bulk analyst, you'd like to go back and blame the surveyor for not taking a decent enough sample. But it might be that we need to actually use some more treatment methods, not just breaking down the sample, but maybe using acid to use that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and how we can use that in our laboratories. Also, adhesives and mastics, again, it mentions here about breaking, solvent treatment or combustion. Maybe a combination of those could help. Whatever your capacity or capability is in your lab, you may well decide to use solvent treatment. And again, I'm just going to talk through solvent treatment as a possible technique that you might want to take up. Loose soils and aggregates, well, there's a specific method for that now in Appendix 2. But the one here, vermiculite, a new term that's sort of come in here, specialist or specialized treatment. So sedimentation, for instance, which will be very unfamiliar to a lot of laboratories, and it might not be a method that you would employ, but it's something to investigate and look at. But vermiculite isn't something that comes across our microscopes very often, but it might be something that you take up. And certainly wet samples. Wet samples are not good for analysis when you're trying to use any confirmatory analysis with PLM. So, you do want to make sure they're dry. And most of us have got the capability of a hot plate or an oven. So just to reiterate, in Appendix 2, routine procedures for sample treatment used in the laboratory should be fully documented. So any of those treatments that you've got, you'll probably already have them fully documented in your methodology. But if you're going to introduce something like HCl, acid digestion or solvent digestion, you do want to fully document it. That's what it's requiring. And any deviations from these procedures for particular samples should be recorded. So you might have a tricky sample that you need to look at in more detail, and you need to record those details. And the lab must record sample preparation techniques used. So if it's Alpha Tracker or Teams or paper-based system, you need to record what you've used. And on page 116, just to reiterate here, it says one or more of these should be carried out. That's treatments carried out whenever regulated asbestos fibers are not found in a material product that is known to have the potential to contain asbestos. So in other words, we should be going that one stage further, using one or more techniques. Now, your lab analysts are professionals. They've got a lot of experience. They know what techniques they need to use to sort of ensure they've got the right analysis, but it might be that you need to reflect on that and put some more treatment methods together. So most of these are familiar. Most of the 157 labs in the UK will have cabinets that look exactly like this. Plastic tray, not terribly robust. Originally, WeighSafe was for weighing powders, not really for treatment of asbestos samples. So we've already got a challenge if we're looking at introducing solvents and acid extraction. Then you have our limitations. And one of the main limitations is making sure we've got a safe working environment. Because quite clearly, with the HEPA filter at the rear of the cabinet there, it's not designed for using large amounts of acetone or any other volatile chemical. We cannot have that recirculating into our working space, especially if there's no natural ventilation and you've got some kind of recirculating air conditioning system. So you need to consider what techniques are safe for you with the capability of your lab already. So that's something to consider. In the middle there, you'll see all the tools of the trade, as it were, very straightforward, including a very simple lighter from the pound shop, brilliant tool for burning bits of material that are sort of in the way, as it were, in a matrix. You can use that quite readily. And also you'll see in the center there, a rubber on the end of a pencil. Very simple tool, but very good for disaggregating particles from fiber bundles that you're trying to observe under a cover slip. So sometimes the most simple tools for breaking down samples and sample treatment are very widely available, and we don't need to go to great lengths to introduce them. So all of those will be familiar to you. What might not be familiar is using acid. And as you can see in the right-hand side there, we've got acetone. We're all very familiar. If you've got an accredited lab, you're more than likely to have an air testing accreditation as well. So you're already storing acetone and possibly using it in your analysis. But again, it's got to be in very small amounts to cater for the capabilities of your lab if you're recirculating air. On the far right there, you'll see the bottle of hydrochloric acid. This is 10% hydrochloric acid in small bottles, and we decant them into even smaller bottles. So there's less to be spilt, less to be used, and less to be contaminated, potentially if we use them regularly. So in chemical treatment, my advice is to keep it simple. You must risk assess your lab's capability for using it. Remember, those WaySafe cabinets have their limitations. They're very good, they're very practical, but they have their limitations. And also you must train your staff. So as you're looking at your training schedule, you will need to add use of chemicals and handling of chemicals because it may be unfamiliar to your analysts. You must look at your emergency procedures for spillages, because undoubtedly at some point someone will spill something, but what do you do about it? Use the methods within your capability that you're confident to use and keep it simple. And this is where we're going to look at some microchemistry, maybe an unfamiliar term to you, but something that could be very useful in your lab. It's certainly something we teach on the P401 at ABP. Use what you already have. Potentially for solvent extraction, using Cargill liquid is something we're very familiar with using, and it's available to us all day, every day. So what about microchemistry, particularly treatment of acid? In 248, it mentions acetic acid at 50% or hydrochloric acid at 10%. Both sort of can be available in very small amounts. You don't need to buy litres and litres of it unless that's what you need for your laboratory. Very useful for textured coatings, as we know, and the dish at the bottom there, bottom left of the pictures, very familiar, white powder, white plaster, white emulsion, and white fibers. It's the bane of most analysts' life, having to go through textured coatings, finding asbestos fibers. Useful for powders, plasters, dust, debris, and other samples. And what it will do is that if you use some very small drops on a slide, as you can see in the middle picture here, microchemistry on a slide, you can observe your substrate, dissolving, effervescing, as you can see on the far right there. As it effervesces, it just releases that substrate, any carbonates that might be present, and then it will give you the opportunity to see those fiber bundles, and then you can extract them, wash them with acetone, and then you can have the opportunity to look at them, maybe using a larger cover slip so you've got a larger area to look at, and it's just giving you the opportunity to maybe not wear your analysts out by having to search through what is effectively a snowstorm to find those fibers. And also it's a very useful technique using acid digestion for confirmatory NAD confirmation. And again, it's something that you can develop within your lab. So you don't need large amounts of wet chemistry or wet chemists for this method. It can be used in very small amounts on slides. And I'd certainly recommend looking at that as a technique for introducing into your lab if it's not already introduced. So what about solvent extraction? I've had some conversation with some labs about some very sort of high tech solvent extraction equipment, way beyond my pay grade. I have done wet chemistry in the past, as an environmental scientist many years ago when I was training, but certainly I wouldn't introduce it into my lab. So we're looking here, Cargill liquids, something we have readily available, and it will nicely break down bituminous substrates. As you can see in the bottom two, it's not an easy process. It's something that has to be a skilled process, but it is available. It means that we're using something that we're familiar with. We're not introducing another chemical that could be circulated in the laboratory. We are using something that's readily available. So we can remove the substrate. It will sort of virtually melt within the cargo liquid if you leave it for some time. And then you've got the opportunity of extracting some probably dirty fibers, but you can wash them in successive drops of cargo liquid. And then you're left with a bunch of fibers that you can easily drop into 155, put a cover slip on, and then you've got your confirmatory analysis. It might just make that difference in terms of NAD, or yes, we do have a confirmation of asbestos containing. So again, sodium hydroxide could be used. There was mention, I think, in one of the questions about using something far more hazardous, which was toluene. I wouldn't recommend using that in our labs at all. It's a nasty chemical that really needs some very expert handling. But something like cargo or sodium hydroxide with the right cost risk assessment and risk assessment in the lab could well be, become a method that we use quite regularly. So the last one I wanted to talk about was just combustion. Don't forget combustion. It could be very useful. I've certainly spoken to and taught laboratories before that I think it was in Sweden that they burn everything. Everything when it comes into the lab goes into a crucible, and then they look for asbestos afterwards. I certainly wouldn't recommend that. As you can see, a lovely shiny crucible there. But maybe using lighters, using spirit burners, so that you've got the opportunity of removing extraneous material or maybe confounding fibers to allow you to get to the material that you want to analyze. So just in summary then, choose your treatment regime carefully, make sure you train your laboratory staff, validate your methods, make sure you're really secure on those methods, that you've got confidence in them. And all these treatments should aid analysis, shouldn't slow it down, but improve the accuracy of analysis. And that's the end of my webinar. Thank you very much.
I was trying to do a virtual applause there, Sarah. Thank you so much for that. I think that was really, really interesting. I think there'll be a whole ton of questions about that, but we want to save those to the end. So if anyone's got any burning questions, like I say, just make a note of it and we'll ask it at the end. And I think, though, I haven't said there won't be any questions. I just wanted to ask maybe a couple of ones of just what your opinion is, Sarah's. I think everyone's seen this and gone, solvent extraction, oh my God, do we need to buy Soxhlet tubes and all the rest of it? And my experience, my first job was at a public analyst laboratory where we had every solvent under the sun and we had all sorts of wonderful treatment methods and things like that. And what I found is it didn't make any bloody difference to the samples whatsoever. So, that's my personal experience of it, that it wasn't a good technique to use it. And I think my interpretation of what you're saying is we're talking about microchemistry, not massive wet chemistry stuff. So I think that's a really valid point, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that later. So thank you so much for that. Right, Paul, thank you for joining us from Portugal. Disappointed you don't have a Hawaiian shirt on, but apart from that, I'm really pleased that you're here. Paul is the technical manager at SGS and has over 20 years experience of dealing with asbestos. And I'm sure, again, this is going to be very interesting for everyone here, because Paul's going to take us through a presentation on 4-stage clearance QC. So really looking forward, Paul, again, to what you've got to say. Thank you.
Let's see if I managed to successfully share my screen. That always helps. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to my holiday in Portugal. Nice to have you all with me. I'll try and keep it relatively short, get it out quickly, because I do have some sun lounging to get back to. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is obviously 4-stage clearances and the QC around that has obviously come into being in the new HSG248. I like to keep things simple. What do they want and why do they want it, and how are we going to deliver it? So where we were, the combination of HSG248 and Lab 30 from UCAS, we had to do one technical audit per year per analyst. And then a number of completed 4-stage clearances had to be rechecked each year, and a number of completed reports had to be checked each year. Where we're going to, 4 technical audits per year per analyst, and about 5% of reports to be checked for each analyst. Really went wrong. Have you still got me? I just bombed out at my end. I'll have to share again, I think. You still got that? Right, great. About 5% of 4-stage clearances to be checked at the end of stage 2. So this is what I hear a lot from people. Oh God, we're just doing HSC's job again. Well, that's not really entirely true, but there are some benefits. I remember when I was a lad, first doing 4-stage clearances and clearance tests before that. In the summer, it was always a time of fear for analysts because the HSE were out in force, and we'd all be calling each other, saying, "Oh God, the HSE are making their rounds. You know, mate, let's make sure we're tight and everything's safe." I don't see that as much nowadays, and what we're instead going to see is ourselves later in our lives as technical managers and quality managers doing this work instead. So from the guidance over the last 10 years, there have been on average between 30,000 and 35,000 annual notifications of licensed work in Great Britain, each one requiring a 4-stage clearance by an analyst. Analyst clearly has an important role in ensuring that workplaces and premises are safe for reoccupation or demolition after asbestos removal work has taken place. So that's quite a lot of clearance inspections that HSC isn't going to make. We're going to make them instead. Plus, 3 times the number of analysts out there are going to get an additional technical audit. That's a lot of extra man days, potentially 1,500 man days of additional quality work. Down to my, frankly, terrible maths, but rough estimate, how are we going to pay for that? Are we going to pay for that? Are clients going to pay for that? It didn't work out too well when 4-stage clearances were introduced. So what is it that they're actually asking for? Well, we've got 4 technical audits per year, which frankly are much the same as we were doing before. We've got general paperwork checks, looking at what the contract has given us, looking at PPE and RPE that we're wearing. Are we wearing it correctly? Are we adopting the correct decontamination procedures? Are we following them correctly? Stage 1, are we checking everything we need to check? Looking at the transit route, the skips and all that, the lighting and everything. Have we made the right decision to pass it off or not? At stage 2, have we spent enough time looking at the thorough visual inspection in line with the estimate that we make beforehand? Have any issues been dealt with appropriately and recorded? And I would imagine by the contractor and not by the analyst. Obviously, that's something which is emphasized quite a lot in this guidance. There should be no visible dust remaining in the reinspection area, and that the correct equipment is being used for visual inspection. Stage 3, we're looking at the sampling locations, the times, the disturbance periods that are being used, and that we're giving ourselves enough time to actually set up the microscope properly and count the slides at the correct pace. At stage 4, we're going to look and see that the visual inspection carried out thoroughly, any remedial action carried out correctly, and that at the end of the day, we've got enough evidence to support the clearance certificate that we have issued. Nothing new there under the sun, really. Desktop review of certificates, similar kind of situation where we're just looking to make sure that paperwork has been issued indicates we've done it correctly. So the handover form, did we get that from the contractor? Was it worth the paper it was written on? It's the site-specific documentation, the plan of work, the analyst risk assessment. Did we look at that? Did we actually find any problems that are in there? Stage 1, have we correctly documented what's been done there? Properly check the transit route. Do the photos show? Do they reflect the statements that we've made? Stage 2, did we spend enough time on that thorough visual inspection based on the photographs we've taken? Have any issues been at stage 2 been properly documented? Hard to tell that one really, because we don't know what happened on site, only what's written down. Same with additional cleaning by the licensed contractor. Is there any debris in those photographs? Have we seen anything that we shouldn't in the pictures that we've taken? Was the correct equipment used? Well, we're looking at documented evidence for the brush, but I don't know how we're going to see whether a mirror is being used or whether the torch was in use at the time. Stage 3, correct sampling locations, times, disturbance periods used. The analysis time was sufficient and in line with the guidance. The number of graticule areas was appropriate, and the result was correctly, and in cases where this stage is passed, less than 0.015 fibers per mil. At stage 4, the visual inspection was satisfactory. We tell that by how long it took and the evidence in the photographs that we provided. And finally, overall, have we presented enough photographic evidence? Has it been provided? Does it meet the requirements of the standard? Can we actually use it for anything valuable? Has all the documentation been completed correctly and in order? All right, so that's what they want. And why do they want it? Well, it's obviously based on, if you haven't been living under a rock for the last 5 years, this analyst inspection program that HSC undertook in 2014 to 2015 as part of preparation for this guide. They published their report in 2018. I know BOHS and other organizations had roadshows and presentations on it to make us all aware of it. It assessed the range and scale of analyst activities and involved appraisal of administrative procedures, the office, the records that we've got, as well as on-site activities. The study focused in particular on the practices and standards of the 4-stage clearance, which is carried out after removal of asbestos materials to ensure it's safe for reoccupation by the public. This is what is reflected in those checklists that we just went through. The things that they found wrong are the things that they're asking us to check now. The analyst inspection program identified poor practices and standards for some analysts during 4-stage clearances, including multiple room enclosures. Samples were only collected from some of the rooms, not all of them as required in the guidance. Some vital equipment was missing, i.e. they didn't have a brush, or they didn't have a mirror, or no torch, no screwdriver, making life hard for themselves. Insufficient time taken to count the slides, potentially resulting in incorrect results. Analysts were unshaven, which significantly reduced the protection provided by their respirators. Obviously, health implications for the analyst there. Progressive and systematic visual inspections were not always carried out. Certainly something I've seen in many an audit myself, is that analysts will spot something, focus on it, and then forget to look at other things. GCU checks not carried out to ensure the unit was operational and ready for use, and some transit and waste routes were cluttered but not challenged. So we're seeing all of this in those checklists. So, oh my God, analysts were terrible. Analysts should appreciate that there are legal responsibilities and liabilities on them as individuals to ensure their actions or inactions do not affect the health and safety of work of colleagues and others. The findings of the analyst inspection program highlight the need for significant monitoring, reviewing, and supervision of analyst work. So, HSC are going to run around and crack down on all the analysts, right? Not really, because HSC, like many public bodies, no longer have the funding, no longer have the manpower to do this themselves. So to some extent, yes, we are taking on this responsibility, but so we should. They're our staff. The importance of the employer ensuring satisfactory analyst performance on site cannot be overemphasized. Deficiencies and discrepancies can only be identified by close scrutiny of analyst behavior, practices, and outputs, including documentation during clearance site work. To ensure continued satisfactory 4-stage clearance performance, analyst work should be regularly assessed. Assessment can include structured observation and monitoring, feedback from clients, and 4-stage clearance results. For example, the proportion of passes and failures. Are we logging that? Are we monitoring that? How are we presenting that? And what are we doing with the information? Re-inspections and audits, starting to get into the interesting stuff now. So a regular program of on-site auditing, monitoring, including re-inspection through joint visits should be carried out. There should be no colluding between the parties. It is recommended that about 5% of all 4-stage clearances undertaken per annum by the analyst organization are checked. Every analyst is audited on-site at least 4 times per annum with reasonable intervals in between. So we've got to space it out. That's a lot of effort. That is a lot more on your technical manager, on your quality manager. It's a lot to do, but it has valuable results. But then again, re-inspections and audits, I think this is a lot of it comes down to. So the problems. Auditing should be thorough and include a blind, separate, and independent re-inspection of stage 2, conducted promptly after the analyst has completed the visual inspection, exercising reasonable judgment about adequate and proportionate time for this. So, just as the analyst walks out stage 2 and he's about to put his pumps on, miraculously, I'm going to be there to catch it, to recheck the work that he's done. A couple of issues with that. How can a thorough audit of a 4-stage process include blind assessment of the 2nd stage if the thorough audit also includes stage 1? How can the audit be blind if we have to arrange to reach the site for the end of stage 2 and not before or after? We need to ask someone when that's actually going to happen. How can we avoid collusion if the analyst knows that we're coming? How is it practical for the analyst not to know and yet still to turn up at the right time? So there are some lessons for me from HSG264 and RG8. Not exactly the same, but there are parallels. And if we look at the two, maybe we can get an idea of how we might practically implement this. So 264 requires similar blind re-inspections, but of surveys carried out. In practice, they're carried out around the time of the original survey, sometimes at the same time, sometimes just after, sometimes the day after. About 5% is where we started out with 264, but that's come down to more than 4% to many UCAS assessors. So they reduced the burden on us for domestic premises as well. So there's a lot of house surveys get carried out every day, and to be fair, a lot of the forced agency clearances that we're doing are also carried out in a domestic setting. Simple areas necessarily generating large numbers, there might be some scope to scale that back and concentrate on higher risk jobs, applying a risk-based approach. Re-inspections in this case are different to audits, and they're often carried out by other trained surveyors to reduce the burden on the quality and technical manager. Perhaps we can go down a similar route here. The audits are carried out by the technical staff. Re-inspections might be carried out by trained analysts. The more audit-like elements of the re-inspection can be removed as they are included in technical audits, leaving just essentially, did we miss something in the visual inspection? Hone in on that, can't go too far wrong. Can we assume that UCAS will apply a similar interpretation to Lab 30, or can we lead it in that direction, or do we want to? Obviously, this is just my opinion as an individual, not that of SGS UK Limited, or indeed FAAM, but it's just a thought, and I think it might be a practical way to go with it. So we would use our technical manager or quality manager, so on, to undertake the additional 3 audits per year per analyst. We already carry out 1 per year per analyst. It's a bit more work, but it's doable. And we use assessor staff on an ad hoc basis when they're available, and they could be sent to site without the name of the analyst carrying out the work via the contractor's supervisor. So we try to maintain the blindness and also a bit of an unexpected timing of it to every now and again, bang, this guy's going to go to site and inspect one of our staff. Technical and quality managers will continue to carry out the report checks, as probably we already are. And then we're using this mixture of suitably trained site staff and technical staff to carry out the greater than 4% re-inspections. This might allow us to use what is otherwise dead time for some staff to minimize some of this cost impact, because if it goes anything like when 4-stage clearances were introduced, everyone puts their prices up and then everyone puts them back down. So we end up carrying the burden. And of course, there's always one less problem. And for us, it's normally the contractor. So even in this best case scenario, there's one potential weak link, the contractor. The contractor's got a delay and he's got to agree to that. He knows we're coming. He knows there's going to be a delay. He's going to try and avoid that often. He's got to not tell the original analyst that we're coming. And he's going to need to liaise with the assessor to get the timing right. And they will, in many cases, need to liaise with their client on the delays. Again, looking at domestic, there's a particular problem because often contractors are trying to do work the same day and get the tenant back in. Any kind of delay on an agreed handover of the property is going to cause problems with their clients. And it's easy to say, no, we should take 2 days, but all of these contractors are on frameworks, and the frameworks are very specific. They don't really have a lot of choice in the matter. So probably we'll need some wiggle room on domestics. My conclusions, takeaways from this, well, the guidance in this area isn't actually that well worded. It does not aid in the interpretation where we're talking about re-inspections and audits kind of interchangeably. Revisiting about 5% of sites is recommended, but does that mean it's more optional than the rest of the guidance, where everything's just stated? How realistic is it that any of the cost of this actually ends up with the client? How realistic is it that we will carry this out without collusion between analysts and contractors and between the analysts themselves? And blind. Analysts communicate with their colleagues and with contractors. In the end, UCAS and leadership from industry bodies like FAAM and BOHS could have a huge influence on this implementation. Just as it's written in a page that comes from HSC, doesn't often end up the way that it gets executed in the real world. So it's up to us to talk about it, discuss it, and try and provide and feed to UCAS a way forward that will work for everyone. Thanks very much.
Paul, again, thank you so much for that. I'm absolutely certain there will also be a bucket load of questions in relation to that. So,
Sure.
and we'll say we're going to have an open panel at the end. And I think, you know, for me, one of the key questions, honestly, is the one that you said pretty early on, which is, you know, is who pays. And I think that's partly why we, you know, what are we doing this for? We step back from it. Why has the HSE required us to do more audits? Because they found that some of the standards were crap, so something needed to be done about it. And for me personally, I think we don't talk enough about how the fact is that a lot of the buyers in the commercial situation we're in have all the control and all of the power, and that has caused there to be a lot of competition in terms of pricing. And actually, a lot of it, because of the pricing, you're talking about time constraints, pressure, who's going to pay for that. And I think that's what a lot of labs are thinking about. You know, it's like going, it's difficult enough as it is at the moment. There's more burden on us. Is everyone going to increase their prices given the way that the market's structured? And I don't know, and I don't think we talk about that enough. But anyway, I'm sure there will be lots of questions, and probably around the technical side of the auditing at the end, and I'm sure we'll get to that. So Paul, again, thank you very much for that. Ben, again, thanks so much for joining us. Are you going to have a chat through us with the CDM regulations?
I've got the easy one, Jonathan.
It's hopefully the least contentious out of everything. We've picked. I think we tried to pick the ones where we, you know, there are areas where people will want to have discussion. But hopefully yours is going to be straightforward. I hope. And you know, thanks again so much for presenting. Ben is the technical and quality director at ACE Consultants, and has been involved with the industry since the very early 90s. So Ben, I'll hand it over to you. I look forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Afternoon all. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. Take that as they landed yet.
Yep,
Yeah, we can see them.
Yep, brilliant. I've had a reasonable frustrating time with technology today, so I'm squatting in a makeshift office at the minute, but not in a field in Shropshire, as it might be depicted by the backdrop. As I said, this should be the simple one. I'm going to do a quick recap of what CDM actually asks us to do. The first thing to comment on is that within the 248 we had been working to, there was no mention of CDM. And so we've now got a few mentions within the current edition, and it's how does that impact on us? Well, it's always meant to have impacted on us, but it is now a little bit more exacting, and it brings to the fore where and how we need to behave. So CDM 2015 replaced CDM 2007, and in that iteration, it changed some of the technical descriptions of the roles, and it didn't significantly change the ethos of what the regulations were about, or the engagement and the communication that it was trying to promote. With the regulation itself, we have an ACOP, L153, Managing Health and Safety in Construction, and a couple of further items that are useful with different elements of complexity and structure to them. The short guide and DG 411, really geared for a quick look and how do I need to behave. And then what's needed in the construction phase plan, CIS 80. All of these, as ever, are available up on HSE websites. But the mainstay of it was identifying risks that could be presented through construction on sites, providing mitigation, communicating that mitigation, managing sites effectively to ensure that those risks didn't actually cause accidents, but also the risks went beyond just the physical. It was task-specific elements, and also anything that might affect the delivery of the work, the timings. So it looked at designing projects that were effectively delivered, ensuring you had the correct equipment. Individuals had training, that there were management controls in place to allow the delivery of the project effectively, and that all of this was communicated on the site so individuals knew what they were up to and they didn't trip over each other and get things wrong. The subsequent elements of it were that there was a documentation produced at the end of the scheme that allowed the operation of the site to be undertaken safely and effectively. So at that point, we have something that's called the health and safety file. And within that file will be how to run the air conditioning, how to switch on the boilers, but also from our context, any residual risk relating to asbestos. So whether or not there's a management plan in place, whether or not there were elements that couldn't be taken out during remediation schemes for asbestos, and that has to be put in place with what controls need to be around the asbestos risk. So that's sort of in a nutshell what that was on about. Within CDM itself, we've got a couple of good places to look to give us an indicator of what we're trying to do. So Appendix 5 within the ACOP gives us a flow chart that describes how we're meant to engage on the project, who we're meant to be talking to, and the tasks that those individuals are meant to be doing, and the flow of information between. If I just bring these out just quickly. The start of a project, we have a client. The client is there to kickstart everything, to engage with our teams that are coming on site, and to start generating a flow of information, as in they will be saying what they want to come out of the project, at which point they should be discussing with the principal designer, and they're looking at the existing information, determining if there's new information needed, do we need surveys and inspections, and particularly an asbestos survey. What further information will be required and how it will happen through the construction phase. With the designers, there was one principal designer who's assigned, who then has to coordinate the efforts and ensure that the other designers are engaged. If there's a larger scheme where you've got installation of wet heating systems, electrics, lighting, as well as just general building works, then all of those individuals need to put in what equipment they're putting in place, where it's going to go, how it's going to be installed, how it will impact on the asbestos that's in the structures. This will then feed to the ability to price the work, for the construction phase plan to be generated from the principal contractor, who would be the winning bidder, and at which point it moves into a construction phase and the principal contractor takes over the control of the site and starts the scheme. At which point we as analysts and laboratories will be on board to undertake monitoring and 4-stage clearances for the asbestos removal works, and then to feed the information back in. And that then comes out in the last element, the health and safety file. The requirement is with the client to ensure it's delivered with the principal designer. The principal contractor is providing information, and all of the subcontractors should be feeding this back into the principal contractor to allow the information to be passed effectively, and then to generate this end of project health and safety file. There may be snagging periods when elements need to be considered. There may be changes to process, to deliverables, the scope altered through the course of the project. And so those variations need to be caught in the documentation that's being presented, and to enable everyone to have a documentation that allows them to manage the circumstances and the situation of the project. I will just mention about F10. F10 is where it is a major scheme and it is notified to HSE in the same way that we do on ASB5s, but these notifications can happen a couple of days before the works. It should go in earlier and is not quite in the same vein as how we see the ASB5 notifications. But here are the criteria for when you would do it: more than 30 days, more than 20 workers at the same time, or we're exceeding 500 person days on the sites. Does it include bank holidays? Every day of construction counts. If you're working the bank holidays, then it counts. The client is accountable for notifying, but they will usually defer to either a project manager or a principal designer, or in conversation with the principal contractor who will do the notifications. As we said, these slides will be coming out, so some of this is more for reference rather than us going through just now. All the particulars here for what would go into the F10. Now, for us as the accredited laboratories, what do we have to do? Well, we have to be knowledgeable. We have to be aware of all of these constraints and controls around the construction phases, and we have to engage with the other teams. It used to be that we were told what we were going to do, where we were going. We're now being fully engaged to be part of the process. I know at the latter stage of Paul's slides, he was talking about the contractors actually talking to us and allowing us to get on site for the re-inspections. Well, we need to be part of the system and in communication at all times with them. So this is part of the planning stage as well as the construction phase that we're in communication with them, as well as then feeding back into the health and safety file. There are a number of references now that we've got within 248. It creates this link, this bridge back to the CDM regulations themselves. But in particular, this is all to do with the knowledge, the training, and the competency of the individual team members, rather than hanging it against any specific elements. So within Appendix 9 of 248, we have the recommended core competencies that we have to consider. And if we just have a quick look at those, these are part of the foundation materials that our individuals will have to be aware of, and we as seniors will have to be writing into our procedures, putting into our processes, and making sure that we are engaged effectively with our clients. It needs to be relevant to the roles and understand these main points of the regulations to do with identifying the risk, mitigating that risk, communicating, and working effectively on site. As individuals within the industry, we've all had circumstances where we've seen practice that we wouldn't have liked our own bodies to be doing, or we've thought ourselves at risk. We need to know that we are standing up to that and telling the clients, telling the contractors that it is unacceptable and that we want change to happen to allow these schemes to go ahead. Within Table 9.4, again, we've got the similar context that CAR and CDM roles and requirements have to be met. We're able to recognize the compliance and non-compliance of the licensed contractor. We're able to show that we can stop and hold and deal with the contractors when they are doing elements that would otherwise be deemed to be inappropriate. We're able to solve problems and communicate measures to improve the circumstance or offer solutions, as well as we talked about with Paul's talk as well, the effective record keeping. We talked about the labs. We've also got a reference here in 248 back to the surveying and sampling within 264. And so this again is informing the CDM projects and the elements under CDM that we need to present information in an effective way. So the survey reports will be incorporated into the planning stages, and then the subsequent registers will be incorporated into the health and safety files to enable the effective management of the properties or the and the structures. So we need to be able to communicate that. We need to be able to phrase reports, phrase elements to go into the documentation so it's effective and that it can be managed properly after we've left the clients to it. Well, that was a very brief view, but I don't think that it's going to have the trouble and context that the other two subject matters that we've talked about are, because it's things that we've had to deal with for quite a long time. It's just being clearly stated now within our own documentation about how we engage and what is expected of us. hopefully you've got lots of questions now for Sarah and Paul and none for me.
Ben, thank you so much for that. I think just on the comment thread there that Bruce has just done a quick little clarification around the approved code of practice for CDM. So Bruce, thanks for that comment. I think everyone should be able to note that. So yeah, Ben, thanks very much for that. Hopefully that one, not too contentious. So thanks to all of the presenters there. That brings us on to our forum discussion and with the panel, and it's a difficult one to manage because there's a lot of us on an online forum. I think these ones are more difficult. It's a little bit more difficult to ask a question and have that kind of flow, so we're going to do our very best to manage that. But what I thought we would do is share some of the questions that have been that were emailed previously to us and run through those. We might not have time to go into each individual question, and I've got a feeling as well, because some of the technical bits, I know what it's like when asbestos people start to talk together. They kind of carry on till midnight and never shut up. So we're going to try and move it through through some of the different the areas. And what I really want to try and do is to pick out themes of, look, this auditing thing it is causing a lot of confusion. Let's go away and have another workshop about this. And the same thing for the bulk analysis. I mean, I think I really agree with what Sarah said on there, and we're thinking microchemistry rather than huge chemistry lab stuff. But other people might have different views on that, and it's also, I guess, everyone's thinking, well, this is all well and good, but how are our regulators in terms of UCAS going to interpret it? But I think it's for us to interpret it and decide what we collectively think is the right way. And it's all about getting the right answer, and that's what I think we need to to be focused on. That's that's the key bit there. So what I will do is so the panel as well consists of all of the presenters. Colette Willoughby, thank you so much for joining that. I'm seeing from FAAM and NORAC and several other hats as well, and also Sam Lord, who is hiding at the moment because I can't see, but I'm sure I'm sure Sam is here somewhere. So again, Sam, thank you so much for joining us. And I think as well we need to be fair to Sam as well in terms of the questions that we ask. If Sam gives an answer, it's not not necessarily the HSE's position, if that makes sense. There might be bits where it is, but we need to, I think sometimes we're looking for areas that we, if there's a big issue around something, let's go away and talk about it some more. So I hope that makes sense. Sam, thanks for joining us. What I'll do is hopefully I'll share the some of the questions. I'm sorry if we skip over some of these quite quickly as well, because they might be straightforward to answer, and also there might be other ones where we've asked the question before. So just bear with us as we run through these ones that were originally, and then we'll open it up to any like kind of verbal or typed questions. So Darren, thank you for sending these questions in, and I think the first one was around the site-specific plans of work, and this is for the 4-stage clearance. And you're saying, can there be, generic ones for similar bits of work? And I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know what everyone else is looking at doing in terms of how they're going to either expand their current risk assessments to cover this, or are doing something more detailed. I don't know, Paul and Ben, what are your views on that?
Well, I was going to say what we've been doing is that we've had a framework contracts where we've had an overarching risk assessment and RAMS document generated, and then we can quite quickly roll that out into specifics. And so you've got a two-step process there. You have also use dynamic risk assessments through the portals of the Teams or Alpha Tracker, or Teams we use, and that's got the dynamic risk assessments within that.
And
similar,
do you think you
for us? Sorry,
yeah.
So
you've got your work instructions or your methods, the methods that you typically use. You've got risk assessments, and then I guess the kind of contract review side of it will probably deal with bits of that, as you need to know what it is you're are being asked to do, and part of that will be reviewing the 4-stage clearance. So I'm almost imagining that people aren't going to just have a separate thing that it's in. That requirement will be satisfied by a number of things that are existing already with perhaps a little bit more detail. I don't know if
I think so.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, again, if that doesn't answer that question, ask it again, send an email in, and we'll try.
I think
answer it.
some businesses will have had a generic RAMs that they are expecting to roll out everywhere and just change the details. It'll be a little bit more than
It'd
that.
be more than that.
Yeah.
Clarification on the audit numbers: is this once every 3 months or 4 audits over the 12-month period? I think the guidance says that it needs to be spread out. So what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a reasonable spacing between them.
Yeah, so that's open to interpretation, isn't it? So I would doubt that everyone will be able to do it exactly every 3 months. But if you do 4 audits in 1 week and count that for the year equally, that is inappropriate as well, I would presume. So I think that's one of the.
Sorry, Jonathan. I would guess on that as well, though, the audit and the audit frequency will really depend on what sort of materials you're working on, because you wouldn't want to audit somebody on the same product time unless that's the only material that they do clearance testing on. Whereas if you've got a range of materials, it'd be far more sensible to audit across that range, which would determine then your audit frequency. It might be just as and when those jobs come in.
Yeah. And I guess that's when the flexibility has to happen. If you haven't had a particular thing for a particular amount of time, and then 2 come along at once, well, you're probably just going to go, well, there you go, we're going to do it. And you would hope there would be flexibility all around in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think a lot of what we would want to be trying to achieve is just looking at what are we after. And realistically, we're trying to make sure that, the analysts that are out there are actually doing the job correctly. They're delivering the right sort of level of service. And if we get too prescriptive, we'll lose sight of that. So I think there's got to be an element of pragmatism over it as well.
That's great. Sam, maybe this is one for you, even though I said I wasn't going to ask you unfair questions. Is it fair to say the HSE do not expect any more than 1 4-stage clearance to be carried out in an 8-hour shift? I guess it's not.
Yeah, well, the guidance doesn't say that. I was conscious I wasn't quite understanding the question, but I would suggest that obviously the amount of time that the 4-stage clearance takes, which will depend on the size of the enclosure and the number of slides, that will inform how long the 4-stage clearance takes. But the guidance doesn't say that. But I think I agreed, Darren, that I was going to email you with the answer to the next question. But if you want to follow up on that, I'm happy to have a chat with you if I haven't quite interpreted that right. But that would be my response to that one.
I think the implication is that with the guidance that there are, we still hear stories of people doing multiple 4-stage clearances, and I guess it's a leading question, isn't it? I guess it's saying is, that probably shouldn't happen. Is it going to still carry on? Well, that is a difficult one to answer. I guess if it's an incredibly simple 4-stage clearance, there might be times where you might be able to do more than one. But
I was just going to say the example of a block of flats, and you've got a riser across 6 floors, and you're in and out of a 2-meter square box, and you're transiting between. That isn't just one 4-stage clearance. The paperwork will deem it as 6 or 7 different distinct areas in the same shift.
There'll always be scenarios where you can do more than one, but there's a practical limit to how many you can do.
There is, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'll move on from that because the limit of quantification one, I think that's a maths related question that Sam's going to forward to anyone who wants additional information on this one. So multiple questions here from Derek. You've gone really liking this. So I'm just going to have a look at the first one. How do you foresee the reclearance procedure being carried out with regards to cooperation from log? I guess this is this coming down to like the who pays bit of it in a way, because it's anticipating, and I think Paul, you mentioned this and saying it is going to be a problem. How do you allow the time? How is there going to be cooperation? Paul and Ben, how do you see this rolling out? Is there an answer?
With difficulty, I would imagine. I think there'll be more kickback if you're rejecting a clearance after stage 4, though. Because you can potentially rehygiene, and it could be a lot of upset and a lot of problems when you've essentially got a site which is it's finished and now it's not finished. That could cause more problems than it's worth.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, just to jump in a bit where there's a question about how flexible, can you do the checks following stage 4? Well, I think the answer to that, is probably no, isn't it?
No, you're not going to be looking at the same thing when you check after stage 4. Both have got valid points for doing that reinspection. To do it at stage 2 to catch any issues that you've had with your initial visual, and your stage 4 is potentially propagating the same issues, but it is whether or not there's materials trapped behind sheeting, behind elements that were sheeted out, poor pre-cleaning. So again, it needs to be done, but it's a different set of things that you're considering.
Okay, that's great.
There's an argument for both then, Ben.
Yeah, yes, frankly.
Yeah, and again, I think that's the kind of question where it is a really good question, and it's probably open for further discussion as well, because I do see issues around it. It may be one of the areas we highlight and go, yeah, we might need a little bit of further work and a bit of workshop on that or something. Will there be a definition of environmental cleaning provided from the HSE? Sam, I guess this is one for you potentially to answer.
Yes. So I was going to say yes, no, and then I thought I'm not that guy out of the Vicar of Dibley, aren't I? Yes, I'll answer the question. No, HSE won't provide a definition of environmental cleaning. However, the Asbestos Network Technical Working Group, which I now chair, and I know Colette and other members, I think possibly on this call, are part of. We did publish this, I think it was February, wasn't it, Colette? We did publish a technical appendix to the minutes of the Asbestos Network meeting. We produced something that hopefully will provide a bit of clarification. And what I'll do is, it's published for members like NORAC, ARCA, ACAD, UCATA to publish on their own website. So it's not published by HSE because it's not HSE guidance, but it is out there. But I do appreciate it might be difficult to find. So I'll put the link. I'm using ARCA. I've just picked that one because it's the first one that I came with. But I'll pop it in the chat. So yeah, there is some guidance, and hopefully that will be helpful.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, that's a really important point, where we have these membership and professional body groups of FAAM, NORAC and ATAC, and there is the Asbestos Network group, and subgroups will work from that. So again, for anyone here who's a FAAM member, I represent FAAM at those meetings, and I really want to get the communication with our membership, and specifically talking about FAAM here. If there are any issues that need raising, we have subgroups on there that are working on particular things, and I'm not sure how well we communicate that at the moment. I want to make sure we get really, really good at that. So, these questions that you go, God, we don't know the answer to that, we can take them to these groups and go, right, you have to come up with an answer to this, and we need input from everyone into those things. And at the minute, I'm not sure everyone's aware just how much work goes on there, and how there are these methods of communication. So we need to, have more of these kind of FAAM seminars, but also be aware that there are these groups who carry out this work and can produce that guidance, because sometimes it's difficult for the HSE to get something published. Well, it's taken a long time for this guidance, hasn't it? So there are methods through these where it's not the same as guidance, but it can be published through the Asbestos Network, and then everyone within the industry has had input into it, including UCAS as well. Right, bear with me while I look at. I'm sorry, I'm going to move. I know these questions are good, but I'm just going to skip past some of these really technical ones, because I think we could probably answer those by email and stuff like that, because they're kind of fairly very detailed technical ones. Going to jump to the one, what was the guidance for when to wear full face RP where I'm carrying out a 4-stage clearance. Most of the info in 248 is around half masks. All the photographs show half masks. However, table A4 shows estimates of time to carry out stage 2 and all the scenarios. So it's basically saying, based on the time scenarios, is it appropriate to probably always wear full face RPE? And I guess the answer is, if your risk assessment says the time is going to be above a certain amount, the answer is yes.
Yeah. If the clearance you're expecting and you've assessed that your space you're going to be in is safe and clean, it is therefore down to the time it'll take you to do the operations. If you're coming out to give a 5-minute rest within the hour as recommended by HSG248, then that is what you do. Otherwise, you'll be in a full face.
Yeah.
I think we need to bear in mind as well the limitations of a full face, though, particularly for doing the visual inspection.
Yep.
So it may well be that the half mask is the most appropriate one from that perspective, but you need to build in the breaks, which I think quite often gets overlooked. People don't appreciate that, they do need to sort of stop and take a little break after an hour.
Okay. Again, Derek, if me interpreting your questions, you feel I'm doing a bad job of that, please jump in and put your mic on and clarify. Another question is, if an analyst should an analyst fail at stage 1 if the area appears dirty? And so it's just kind of, before you enter the enclosure, you decide not to enter it because you can see that it's not correct. Do you fail it at that point?
Yeah. Inspection of completeness as part of stage 1, and if the work is obviously incomplete, then you should fail it at stage 1 on those grounds.
Yes. So you fail it there and you don't enter the enclosure, but you issue a failed stage 1. Is that everyone's interpretation of that? Sam?
John, sorry, I choked. Excuse me.
Wasn't that contentious, Sam?
Yeah, that's my my interpretation. I think there's further guidance about stage 1 at Appendix 5, paras A5.6 to A5.16. But what I would say about the handover form, obviously this is a new thing, and it's really driven at the license removal contractor. And I have been asked in previous forums such as this, if they don't have the handover form, or I think someone mentioned earlier, if it wasn't completed, it was just ticked very flippantly, should you just fail on that? But the guidance is that if just make a note on the 4-stage clearance that was the case, particularly if there's a bit of resistance between the analyst and the contractor, just put a note on it, otherwise there'll be a bit of a standoff. So that's that guidance, particularly to do with the handover form. But what I would also say is that we have when HSE do their license renewal assessments with license removal contractors, we are asking license contractors for evidence that they do use the handover form. So it's not something they should be surprised at. And apparently, feedback from my colleagues in the asbestos licensing unit is that they are finding a lot of contractors do have these, so that's helpful in that respect. And obviously we are communicating this through the trade bodies like ARCA and ACAD. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good answer for that. Thank you. Paragraph 93, is it allowable to reuse a coverall, Sam? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, so just to sort of clarify when you can really reuse a cover, and it hopefully it does say this in the guidance, but it's only when the contamination within the enclosure is not really bad, so that you'd have to have a full decontamination. So you can only come out and reuse the coverall if you've gone through the preliminary decontamination only, and you're not then going to go to full decontamination. So by that basically means that, and also the preliminary decontamination should involve you vacuuming or someone else vacuuming the coveralls. So it's actually going to be quite a low level of contamination to start with, and also going to be for those two reasons which I've just explained. And then sort of rolling it off, I did actually I've got a coverall, and I did put it on this morning to try and see if that was, because I always do like to, I don't want to just say something that I don't believe in. So well, maybe it's because it was quite big, and that might be a different issue, but I did manage to take the coverall off very carefully. I do appreciate that it's very confined in an airlock, but I think it is possible that you can take it off, and then even sort of rolling it so that you don't contaminate the inside, and then just hang it up inside and then put it back on, providing it's not damaged. And obviously, like I said, I would reiterate, it's only if it's only preliminary decontamination is required. And this is the example, going back to what Colette said, if you were doing a rather long visual inspection, and you would have to keep coming out to have those breaks. Otherwise, you could potentially go through quite a few coveralls, and that's why this has been put in there. So yeah, so it's probably a longer answer than was needed, but
and no, Sam, I think that was really good. Thank you. Are surveyors now expected to wear laceless footwear for all refurb and demo surveys? My view on that is it's down to your risk assessment, really. It would depend on the scope of the refurb survey. I don't think there's a must in there, Sam, is therefore.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, planning the survey, if there's a likelihood that you're going to be covered in debris, then yes, obviously it's required. But if it's very straightforward refurb survey, and the likelihood is not, so yeah, down to risk assessment.
That's great, thank you. And again, Derek's making the very valid point again here about sufficient time. Is not just the analyst. I think we want to scream that, don't we? That the removal contract and the duty holders need to share this responsibility. But this is where it comes back again to who pays, and what contractual relationships on there, what pressure is on the analyst. And sometimes I'm sure we've all experienced this. The poor little analyst turning up there getting hammered to get this job finished. It has to get done today. Well, it bloody doesn't if it's not right. But there is that immense pressure, and unfortunately, Derek, I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know whether Paul and Ben have got any comments on this as well, and Colette.
All I would say is this is of course the analyst guide, so that's why we're stressing the analyst should allow the time in the analyst guide. In the contractors guide, I'm sure there'll be chapter and verse on contractors making due allowance for this kind of thing, because it's obviously been a long time since the contractors guide was issued.
And it's fully embedded in the CDM elements, the planning. That's fundamentally where we can draw on the other nuances and bring that in.
Yeah, I think it still doesn't get away from.
No.
Is there a duty holders guide due out? Because
could do with one.
Quite often where the issues lie, don't they? I think that is worthy of more discussion, though, because I think that is probably the hub of the problem, really. There's no reference to spray coating material. Is there an estimate available for this type of work? I'm not sure, Sam, whether there is, or whether that's down to everyone's just experience of it. So
yeah, the apparently where these estimates came from were from UCAS as a result of some of their auditing, and unfortunately there wasn't no data for sprayed coating. But yeah, exactly as you said, Jonathan, my advice would be to use the existing values in that table, because there'll be sort of similarities, albeit it's not a completely different material. But then once you've done that, obviously the occasions where you do a spray coating job, that will allow you to refine that estimate, and that's what the guidance is asking. It's just estimates that individual analysts can then build on to produce their own databases.
I hope that answers that question there. There's a general question around should and shall and must and things like that. And just an example of that being is the analyst should be provided with a copy of the contractor's plan of work. But does that mean that that gives the licensed contractor an opportunity not to provide it? Well, I guess what happens in these things, isn't it, that Sam, is there a reasoning behind the should and the must? Because I know they've got particular meanings, but
they do in regulation they do, and this is obviously guidance, but there is obviously, because UCAS use this and accreditation's involved, there is a bit of a grey area. But I suppose the answer is if it's a legal requirement written in law, the word must will be used. and that's the only reason must is used. Should is used because must can't be used. But yeah, I suppose the point is though that just the guidance is there for a reason. If you understand the reasons, then it should be.
There should or must.
It shouldn't be used as the absence
get
of
out.
must shouldn't be used as a reason for not doing it.
Yeah, okay, that's so it's more of a technicality, and the should in that instance means actually it really should. So if that's the right way of interpreting it. Rebecca, we've become confused about auditing. I think we've all had a lot of confusion, Rebecca, so you're not alone. And annual auditing, i.e. once a year, but in 4 times a year, which is correct. I would have to refer to the document. I'm sorry, Rebecca, can you, I don't actually, I'm confused as well here because I'm not, I need to look at that paragraph. I don't know if I didn't.
I think, sorry, Jonathan,
Yeah.
I just, I think making just the point that there's 2 types of auditing. Again, I'll throw it out to you guys because you guys do the auditing. But yeah, I think the UCAS auditing is sort of separate external auditing, and then the internal auditing is the 4 times a year that's mentioned in the 2.16.
Okay.
Then does that help? Probably not.
Yeah, and then the 5% is of all of the jobs of the organisation rather than by analyst. At least that's how it reads in the guidance. So the organisation has to check 5% of all of its 4-stage clearances at stage 2, and then each analyst individually will be receiving 4 what we call technical audits, internal audits, regardless of how many they individually do per annum. By the looks of that, with a bit of pragmatism applied, as Colette said earlier.
Yeah. The individual does 3 jobs in the year because they're not required, then you audit every single one. Well,
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
that's what UCAS is certainly going to say, isn't it? But, whether we could...
I think, Rebecca, if we fail to answer that question, please raise it again. Or we're going to, hopefully, I can't remember how many more questions we've got to go through, but there'll be a chance for everyone to, the way I'm doing this at the moment, I can't read I can't see if anyone's asking any questions on the chat. So I'll come back to that in a short while.
There's nothing on each one as we've gone there, Jonathan.
Right, thank you. Yeah. And then also an opportunity just sort of to raise a hand. But again, I don't want us to be here till midnight, and it may be that we agree that I probably will ask at the end, would everyone like another workshop or session on bulks and on auditing or whatever it is, or if by some more correspondence these little bits of technical queries do get clarified. So Rahul is working for an energy trust in London, and it's a tricky question about historic dust samples. Colette, I know you love dust. Could you jump in on this and give us a viewpoint on it? Totally unfair of me to do that.
I'm just quickly scanning the question.
Sorry, that was totally unfair of me. Sorry.
It's usually known as a hospital pass, which is very apt.
Yeah, which is totally apt. That was
an absolute hospital Jonathan. Pass. I mean, I think initially, obviously, one of the things that the guidance is trying to get across is basically saying don't just go out and take sort of random dust samples, because it's very, very difficult to prove anything with random dust sampling unless you know the source of the material. Because normally when we're taking samples, it's to try and identify what's the risk from that material, and usually you want to know how far it's spread and things like that. Whereas if you don't know where it's come from, you'd be very hard pushed to even try and deal with it. But also dust samples usually are inherently tiny samples, and even if you find something in it, you take it back to what risk does that actually present. But I know your question is about the fact that okay, you're not going to take dust samples going forward, hopefully, but the ones that have been taken in the past, what do you actually do about them as regards your records? I think you've probably got sort of quite a bit of a difficult situation, because this is the reason why the guidance is now saying just don't do it anymore, because you do end up with this dilemma of you've now got a record that says you've got some asbestos there. I would suggest at the moment that you try and go back and have a look at what is that material, how much is there, and then maybe put a note on your register after that to just try and identify what's the risk from it. And if it doesn't look like it's going to cause any perceived risk at all, I would leave a note on it to that extent, because at the end of the day, the register is there so that you can manage your risks. And if it doesn't present a risk, it's not really, you know, something that you would really need to manage then going forward. I'm sure you will probably have bigger asbestos risks to sort of spend your time and your money on.
Again, Raoul, hopefully that answers the question. But if there's some, you know, if it doesn't, then, you know, keep in correspondence, I think is the answer there. Someone here is looking forward to next week's webinar. I hope they still enjoyed it. Matthew, let me get this one up. We're on to some bulk questions here. Sample treatment implies there would be no need for further sample prep asbestos invited in the search. Can you provide interpretation on how the industry should undertake chemical prep? Well, I'm hoping, you know, that Sarah, do you feel that your presentation regarding the bits of sample prep there, or, you know, again, I don't know if there's maybe an area where there needs deeper discussion about the sample prep part, which I do think is still a bit contentious and a bit open to interpretation. So I'm not sure if we need to take these questions and maybe have another forum where we go into it in a bit more detail. I mean, again, I just sort of do have a bit of an issue about the non-asbestos samples scoring 2 points when they're blatantly not asbestos. You know, sometimes you do, either for your own reasons or at the request of the client, sample a bit of plasterboard, and it's a bit of bloody plasterboard, and, you know, you don't really want to be scoring those of 2 points. Whereas I can completely understand the difficult textured coating that you spent ages on and turns out to be negative is a 2-pointer. So I think there's maybe areas for, you know, for more, you know, more discussion on this. But Sarah, in terms of that question there, do you have any comments?
I think the chemical prep is has to be within the capability of the lab that's discussing the method, and you know, you've got to be able to be comfortable with the treatment that you decide to take up. So I don't think it needs to be every sample. I think it needs to be a technique that's available and that analysts do use regularly, but you know, it's going to have to be on a sort of risk basis of that sample. If you've got a series of them that have had asbestos in them and they're from similar property types, then you might want to go that extra step and use hydrochloric acid or another acid to, you know, remove the matrix so that you can see whether there's any fibers there or not. So I think it has to be individual labs looking at their capability and what they're comfortable with taking that next stage of analysis on.
Yeah.
Certainly that would be my take for that.
I think that's really sound advice. I mean, I remember putting some vinyl tiles and bitumen type samples in chloroform in a soxhlet tube, doing it, leaving it literally for days, and you get it out at the end and it's the same. Particularly vinyl tile, going, well, that's pretty strong stuff, that, because it doesn't seem to make a blind bit of difference to it. So, and I think it's using the interpretation of it, you know, in the guidance there, it's saying, you know, when an analyst thinks there should be asbestos in there, if that makes sense, that's when you need to go a bit further. And we think in all of that stuff should be common sense for an analyst. And I think we need to give them, you know, the analysts more credit. You know, you get a sample, and some samples you're there going, do you know what, there should be something in this because of your experience of having analysed stuff like that before, and you should be spending more time and using maybe more and more techniques to try and get it. But, you know, we don't want to be wasting time on plasterboard, do we? So, for example.
No. And I think, you know, to coming back to the comment earlier about pricing within the industry, I think that's kind of forced our hand to not be looking at additional chemical treatment because, you know, the pricing of bulk analysis is normally swallowed up in the survey. contract price. So, you know, our analysts in our laboratories don't get the recognition maybe that they are professionals and that they do know what they're doing. And this is just additional information to help them get to their analysis point quicker almost, because some of these samples are becoming more challenging. There's no doubt about that. You know, we're getting smaller and smaller samples. When I started out, you know, Bill Sanderson taught me to, you know, go out and sample 100 samples in the morning. In the afternoon, I'd analyze 100 samples, but I was only looking for 3 fibers. Now we're looking at very small fibers, more intricate, you know, talking about dust analysis and so on. We're looking at more and more complex samples that need some complex treatment to make sure we're not missing what's staring in front of us.
No, I'll tell you that really, really useful comments there, Sarah. And I think I'm pleased you raised it again, is that, which I keep saying, is not talking about how the market structure and the pricing affects quality, because you can have all the guidance in the world, but if the market is pushing us towards being as economical as we can, it does have an impact on quality. And I don't think we're very good at the minute at dealing with that, or even acknowledging it, let alone dealing with it. But anyway, the final question on there is says that every analyst should be audited at least 4 times a year. Is this referring to the QC we check at stage 2 or witness audits?
Witness audit is my interpretation, Jonathan. Anyway, I don't know if anyone disagrees with that. 4 witness audits and then 5% rechecks at stage 2.
No, similar interpretation.
Okay.
Well, one thing to say, just the comment there from Matthew about Lab 30 is UCAS are rewriting Lab 30 again in light of HSG248.
And again, if any FAAM or NORAC or ATAC members have any comments on that, all of those members meet with UCAS to discuss these things. So it's so vital that your comments come into us. So the positions of what we believe are presented and discussed with UCAS. Oh, that's brilliant. That's the end of those questions. Thank you so much for everyone on the panel there for bearing with us. Probably some really good comments on here that I haven't been able to read through. So I just wanted to kind of open it up. It's going to be very difficult to manage, and I think we're going to keep this to fairly short period now. But and I'm right at the very end. I just want to go and ask if people feel the need for once everyone's had a time to digest what's happened today, and we'll probably maybe send this out as a Survey Monkey to see if everyone wants to go and have another. If they found it useful, would you like to have another session? Would it be better on a workshop focusing on 1 or 2 of the areas? Or you might amazingly have gone, do you know what? I don't have any more questions now. This has been astonishingly clarifying any questions I may have. But just to open it up now, if anyone does have anything in particular they want to raise, just if you stick your hand up, and I will hopefully be able to see who you are and invite you in. So, Abdullah, could you unmute yourself and ask away?
Yeah, hi there. Afternoon, everyone. It was just clarity really on the handover form. I put a comment in the group chat. It's just the words used in the guidance rather strong and clear. Basically, they say the analyst should not start the independence clearance until the handover document has been received and is satisfactory. Which just raises the question as if it's not available, should one fail stage 1? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's the words that Sam was saying about the should and must and shall.
Yeah. So hi, Abdul. I probably didn't make my point clear enough. Actually, but before I answer, a little plug. It's not a plug. But I meant to say, if anyone wants to. Some of you may have seen me do an update on HSG248 changes for your Carter about last month. If you YouTube that presentation is available, and I do talk quite a lot about the handover form in that. But yeah, Abdul, my point was.
Should we put the link in the chat there, Sam?
Yeah, I'll do. Yeah. Oh, Ben, you did it last time. Can you do that again?
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. But yeah, the point about the handover form is we because the Licensed Contractors Guide hasn't been published or to include that, we acknowledge that point because it is very much something for the licensed contractor to do. So if they haven't got that in place for whatever reason, then that alone is not a reason for the analyst to fail stage 2, but write a note on the clearance form saying no handover form was provided, and then move on. I mean, the point of the handover form actually is to make sure, one of the points is to make sure that the stages of the clearance are less likely to fail because the supervisor has done a thorough inspection. So it's actually it's in everyone's interest, obviously analysts as well, to make sure you don't go into in inspecting closures that have got lots of debris in. So is that clear, Abdul? I'm sorry if it didn't come across clear before. Is that okay?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's just the words that I use there really, and yeah, thanks for the clarity. Yeah,
okay.
So,
thanks.
yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Sarah.
Just add to that, we've been asking for handover sheets for probably 18 months, 2 years now, and I must admit, I think it's working. Because it is making sure that the site supervisor is taking it on board, that we're asking for them. We have gone to that stage of saying, look, if you don't have them, what else are you going to offer us to tell us that you've been in and had your visual inspection before we go in? And I must admit, the contractors that we work with, it's actually turning out to be quite successful.
That's really positive news. Anyone else would like to put their hand up? And I'm sure it's be one of these things that it'll be afterwards you'll kind of think, oh well, I should have, and that's what we want to give the opportunity to happen with perhaps another session. So like I say, we'll definitely send out a Survey Monkey questionnaire.
Jonathan, there's a question in the chat about the role of the analyst and whether or not they're undervalued compared to surveyors.
Wow, I think that's a really interesting question. My personal view is that surveyors, bulk analysts, and analysts are undervalued, and I it causes me actually great distress. I was thinking about I need to write something for a FAAM newsletter, and I was like, well, would you advise anyone, a relative, to leaving school to become an analyst? Who would you recommend it? Say it's a great industry to get into. Isn't that sad? That I've got my nephew. Would I recommend him? Saying, "Oh, what we should do," that's a bit sad, isn't it? And there's a whole host of reasons, and I don't know what the answer is. Well, apart from if the question is, are they undervalued? Yes, that's a straightforward one. And then you've got to start asking, why are they undervalued? The service is undervalued. Why is the service undervalued? Is it because of the clients don't really realise the significance of what's being done there? I can't think of anything else where someone in a professional job is going in to say, I want to go in this area and say, there isn't really so much, the testing whether a carcinogen is present or not, and getting paid not enough money, and not charging enough. But it's best not to get me started on all this, because it's all kind of to do with how the market functions really as well. In my view, it's dysfunctional. And I don't know how we address it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. The market at the moment has been driven down so much for lots and lots of reasons. But I've spoken many times in the past about analysts and them being undervalued before we were even anywhere near having new guidance published. I mean, I know, I think sometimes it is down to the market, but I think that sometimes it's down to the employer as well and how they view their analysts. The whole terminology of pump jockeys, dare I say it, which completely sort of would undermine somebody's their whole sort of self-importance if they're being referred to as a pump jockey. It almost belittles them as you're not that you're not that competent. Right. It's not a skilled job. You just go out and carry pumps around. So I think that it's a whole area all in its own right, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it's probably, and it's not for this this HSG, but it's probably worthy of a seminar itself. And I think, Bruce, you've asked a really valid question there as well, as why do we sell it so cheap? And you know that is the question, isn't it? And there are multiple reasons for it. A lot to do with competition, but a lot to do with the power of the buyer, and a lot to do with the fact that the market is set up to in a way that means the cheapest person will get the most work, which is true in anything, but also it means that the person, you know, let's be honest about it, whoever's worst at doing clearances, you know, gets the next job, don't they? And in some ways, or you know, very subtly, I'm not going to be scathing about anyone who does loads of clearances, because that's not what I mean, but the way everything is structured is that's where it could potentially lead to. I'm being very careful about my wording on that so I don't offend anyone. Sarah, sorry.
Sorry, Jonathan, I just wanted to pick up because I know how passionate you are about this, but I am too. And I feel that particularly four-stage clearance analysts, we should have some professional standing with CPD, and we should have some kind of registration system to raise the profile of them so that we retain good analysts within the industry, and not have this continuous cycle of analysts leaving the industry, and we just get the ones that should have left the industry just recirculating around companies. And I feel very strongly about that we should make, and I think that's FAAM could lead on this, and which would be fantastic.
And again, FAAM there's a huge amount of work is being done and will be done. In fact, it is our strategy, you know, one of our key strategic aims moving forward, particularly in relation to CPD stuff as well. And part of it as well is making the buyers realize the importance of the work that is done by the analysts, which is not being done at the moment. And FAAM have got some really great ideas about how we can, you know, raise that profile. And you know, if you're an analyst, you should be really proud about what you're doing. You know, you should be wanting to do it, and you should be proud about it, and going, you know, your ultimate aim is you're saving someone's life. That's what you're trying to do, is to make sure that someone doesn't die from asbestos. If you step right back from that, and we are failing to communicate that to pretty much everyone, in my view, are not doing a good enough job. Sorry, we've gone off a massive tangent off but sample prep there.
Worth saying, Jonathan.
But that's just, you know, again a way sort of perhaps a personal view. But before we sort of wrap this up, because I'm sure that Paul desperately wants to get onto his balcony and have a cocktail, and quite frankly, I fancy joining him if I was there, I would. But you know, I don't want to stifle anything. But does anyone else have any questions? If I don't see any hands,
I can see no hands.
What like I said, we'll do. I've repeated this twice already, but we will send a questionnaire out to sort of get some. Hang on, sorry, we've got one more hand up. If you could fire away there. As a client, do we encourage our licensed contractor to provide a handover document at the end? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question on this one. Do we encourage our provide handover documents along with completion paperwork at the end of the project?
So would it be useful for the client to start insisting on further documentation coming in?
As a client, sorry, I'm sorry, I misinterpreted the client.
That one.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't.
The waste notes and the site logs and references for the work, that coming back into the project files, it may not end up in the health and safety file, which is the one that's meant to assist with records moving forward. But certainly clients, if you can start asking for that, then you will see that it's been done. And I think
they're asking, do they also provide the contractor's handover document as part of that package? And I think that would be really useful in encouraging them to actually produce it. Yeah.
And I was going to say the handover documents now are meant to be incorporating photographs as well, which allows time stamping and the rest of it to make it detailed and specific to each task.
Yeah, just to clarify that, I think that so the handover form has a specific function which basically hands over the site to start the four-stage clearance. But I think the question, sorry, I didn't see the question, but I think there was a general question about the provision of documentation to clients. And I think, yeah, everyone's sort of agreed that the more that is provided is the better. And I think the way certainly things are going forward in terms of building information management systems, which are all going to be electronic, a lot of that will then be built into that. So there'll almost be a prerequisite. And I know HSC are doing some work on that sort of early stages at the minute, but which will be sort of the way, the future, as it were, making sort of, and that'll hopefully make clients see what documentation they expect. So I guess that could include the handover form, but just I didn't want to just, the 4-stage clearance is obviously a very important form. Waste consignment notes are very important. The handover form has a specific role in 4-stage clearance, but I guess there's no reason why it can't be included in that package.
Yeah.
Okay. Abdul, you've got your hand up, so you could jump in. That'd be great.
I apologize in advance. I'm being a bit greedy here. Second question. I'm going to go again, more controversial on the age-old argument of the DCU, use of the DCU, as in procedure. The argument of going through the dirty end, you know, from the clean shower into the dirty and then out to a clean area. My question was, well, if we all agree that going into the dirty end, starting in the clean end is a bit dodgy, why did the HSG shy away from, again, the question is more making this clear, or are we all saying that we're happy with going through the dirty shower, clean shower through the dirty and then out into a clean area, obviously with the DCU not being connected directly. So the argument is going into a dirty end and then back into a clean end. It just wasn't there, or rather made clear, because that argument has always been there. I'm guessing you're all away. Thank you.
Sorry, Abdul, I'm not sure I understood the question there, or whether that was just a general comment. Is there anything you feel we need to input on that?
The question is basically, can we not use the dirty end, as in when going into an enclosure? So there are companies out there that used, as in Analysts, while they're going into the enclosure, they change in the clean end and then come out of the clean end to the enclosure. Unlike
you're commenting.
Unlike what,
I think you're commenting that there is a potential for cross-contamination moving through the dirty end, going through the work environment.
As in the original guidance, the original guidance clearly says go through the shower, go through the clean, into the shower, out, you know, via the dirty, and then hence potentially contaminating yourself.
What I would say is that in terms of potential contamination, the area deemed the dirty end should not have bucket loads of asbestos on the floor, and given the MPU sitting there, the air changes, scrubbing the air on a rolling routine basis means that you will not be carrying significant contamination from passing through the dirty end to get to the work environment. I think it's down to risk and exposure assessment there.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, it's an age-old argument, I think, which probably, you know, crack on until.
The only thing I'd add is make sure that the only thing I would add is to make sure that before you do make sure that the DCU is being used as it should be, and not be, so they haven't got bags of waste or lots of debris in the dirty end.
And speak up if it is, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this. Sorry, I'm going to go in, but I asked this because there are companies who do use, you know, as in analytical companies out there who do use, you know, the procedure of going in the clean end and coming out of the clean end, and they've had HSC on site and say that's fine, but in essence, that's kind of like in breach of the guidance, if you want to call it. And HSC have kind of agreed in that, it makes sense. Personally, my personal opinion here goes, I feel it's incorrect going into the dirty end, or rather potentially dirty end, regardless of how clean the dirty end is. But it's going into it from the dirty end to a clean end.
I understand. I was going to say some of this is habit forming and perceptions of others seeing what you're up to. So if you are doing something different to the contractors, how do you justify the contractors not doing it?
Indeed.
Yeah.
And at which point then following a routine when you're moving through the dirty end, wearing the effective transit coveralls, wearing your RPE, then it is the right process to move through the dirty end to the work area.
I think
But
that's
yeah,
a really
again, thank
valid
you.
point, Ben.
Yeah,
Actually,
agree.
on there, and Abdul, I'm not sure we'll ever get everyone to entirely agree on that one, and I think it's but it is
Absolutely
really
not.
a really valid point. So I'll stop that on there because it will be one of these ones we will be talking about at the bar for ages if we were to get together. Unless there are any other urgent questions. I just wanted to wrap this up now by saying thank you so very much to all the presenters, Sarah, Ben and Paul, and also the everyone in the background who's done everything to facilitate this. Colette, Sam, Jean, Prentice is hiding somewhere, and Gary and Marie from BOHS as well. So I just wanted to thank them and many others as well that I won't have mentioned. I feel like there's still room for tons of discussion about stuff, but I really, really hope we've clarified some of the issues on there. And what I would, I keep repeating this, but if there are areas where you do think there needs to be more discussion and more clarification, let's get together again, and we'll send out some stuff so everyone has the opportunity to do that. And also, just want to keep getting the message out there that FAAM, NORAC, and ATAC do have representation on the asbestos network and the subgroups from there, where a ton of work gets done, and there's lots of this being thought about and discussed. But if there are any points of feedback, then we definitely want to know about that, and we want to get even better at communicating what happens in those meetings, particularly from a FAAM point of view. So again, thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted there's been so many people have joined us today, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with everyone before too long. So thanks so much, and we'll look forward to having sort of more correspondence. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Enjoy the cocktails,
Bye,
Paul.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure will. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye.
Thanks, Jean. Take care.
Great work.
And Maria should have said there as well, there'll be the recording of this will be going out as well, won't it?
Yeah, it's already been put in the chat, Jonathan.
Oh, is it right? I mean, I just need to get up to speed with everything that's going on there. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Very well. You're right.
Yeah, I'm good. I was just so pleased that so many people have been on this. I'm sure there's still loads and loads of questions from everyone, but that's all good stuff as well, anyway, isn't it?
I've got a couple, but I'll raise them with you outside there. Just clarity.
Yeah, well, or raise them or send them in, and because we'll need to circulate, and I reckon we'll want to have another seminar before too long. So
I think it's been a good session, and we should probably do a few more of these kind of things.
Yeah,
it is good to get the industry talking and try to raise those standards. So very well done to you and the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Right, take care, everyone, and no doubt we'll all catch up soon. Cheers.
All right. See you soon.
Bye.
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 Bye.